Hello and welcome to HealthTech Builders. Here we explore the business of health innovation through real stories from leaders in the trenches, the wins, the failures, and everything in between. You will get insights and practical advice to help you build and lead in health tech. I am your host, Rodrigo Hute. Hi everyone, welcome to the podcast. Today my guest is James Tannahill. James is a founder and CEO of Oneness Agency, a modern digital marketing agency focused on regulated and purpose-driven companies. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about digital marketing and in particular patient acquisition. Patient acquisition is getting harder and harder for providers and for health tech companies. And in particular, how Gen AI is reshaping discovery and most importantly, what executives can do right now to improve visibility and conversions through Gen AI engine optimization. And that's a mouthful, but essentially what people are calling today GEO. So instead of SEO, the new term in AI is GEO. So James, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here today.
Thanks for having me, Rodrigo. This is an absolute pleasure to be on the podcast. And yeah, we'll say GEO today. We'll make it not a mouthful, but I'm excited to be here.
Let's use it. Actually, I've heard different names, for this, but for the sake of today's conversation, let's just use GEO, which is the new SEO, if you will. So, James, let's talk about some of the challenges that marketers are facing today. I think that honestly, being a CMO or being a marketing executive today, it's quite challenging. There are lots of things changing, and I just want to ask you, what are some of the current challenges in the marketing landscape that most of your clients, CMOs, and marketing executives are facing?
Yeah, I mean, you said it. It's a challenging environment, and let me just set the stage briefly. I have to talk about large language models, LLMs, and their prevalence in search. So search is dominated right now by Google Gemini, GPT-4, which encompasses both Bing and ChatGPT. And then there's Perplexity's Claude integration. So when we're talking about AI visibility and citations, Claude really leads that in professional contexts. GPT-4 really has the highest consumer recognition. So when we're talking about branding and content generation, those heavily favor GPT-4 and Claude. So when you're talking about optimizing for OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google, you're covering around 85% of the AI visibility needs across all three categories. So here's the thing for CMOs. Everyone thinks you need three completely different strategies to show up across AI. The reality that I've discovered, and that's also now widely documented, is you actually don't need three strategies. You need one really solid foundation. It needs to be authoritative. You need to have good citations, clear structure, and if you can swing it, you need to have what's called a schema markup. Yeah. Basically, you need to prove what you're talking about, that you know what you're talking about, and make it easy for AI to pull from your digital stuff, the stuff that's out there. So, when you think of it like this, you sort of got one core message, you have one set of expertise, but Claude users might be hanging out on LinkedIn reading white papers that are pretty technical. GPT-4 users could be scrolling through X, and asking ChatGPT for quick questions. I often find myself in that category. And then you have Gemini users who are deep in Google's ecosystem, YouTube, Google Scholar, Business Profile. So you really need to have a comprehensive content foundation, and then you can break it apart and feed it through these other channels. So you're not optimizing for three, you're optimizing for one killer content foundation and then distributing across other ecosystems. So that's one of the, that's the current landscape. And that's a big challenge too, is how do you break it up and distribute it across three ecosystems? And in the healthcare sector, it gets even more tricky. We saw in 2024, there was an increase of 23% in the cost per click year over year. And why this is important is because at the same time, conversion rates declined 15%. So what we're saying is healthcare orgs are spending more to acquire fewer patients. So, you can do the math. Digital ad spending in healthcare in 2024, I think was around $15 billion. Yet customer acquisition costs are at an all-time high. So the days of relying on solely paid acquisition, it's not going as the playbook for the last 10 years has been written. There are new chapters that, frankly, a lot hasn't been written yet, and so there's a lot of people trying to vie for citations in those upcoming chapters for the playbook. So yeah, those are just some of the numbers, frankly, and some of the problems that we're facing in the paid search world specific to healthcare.
Yeah, James, thank you for providing that context, and I would agree. I think that in my mind, what I've seen is there is a number of challenges that marketers are facing today, and they have been facing this for a while now. But you mentioned paid marketing costs. Definitely are rising, and also companies are expressing declines in effectiveness. So a lot of these channels that we have been used to, not all of them, but most of them, are more mature, and it's getting more competitive, less inventory, and so on. Doesn't mean that it doesn't work. It just means that, in my opinion, that it doesn't make sense to heavily rely only in paid advertising. So that's one. The second one, it's around content and content marketing. It's been, content marketing has been around for years and years and years, but now I think with AI, a new trend it's emerging, which is content overload. And everybody, Gen AI, it's democratizing content production. A lot of people are producing more and more and more content, which in turn, this content is overwhelming consumers as well, and also generating a lack of trust in what's real and what's not. And I want to talk about that a little bit later, about how what would be a good content strategy within a GEO overarching strategy. But then the core of today's conversation, it's about GEO, and we know that the other big trend is that search behavior has fundamentally changed. Like traditional keyword based search is declining, and I've heard some CMOs share that their organic traffic has declined by about 30% in 1 year. And also now users are using more complex kind of contextual resolution questions instead of typing questions. So I mean, all of us do that with ChatGPT or Claude whenever we're using those tools. But the bottom line is that SEO is losing dominance, and GEO, it's becoming even more important. But the question that I wanted to ask you is, like, I mean, do you think SEO is dying and now GEO is, all that matters? Or do you think that SEO in Google, it's still relevant?
Yeah, I mean, look, you bring up two good points that sort of set the stage for my answer to that question. So, look, the internet is flooded with AI generated content. You are completely correct. And just to put that into context, I believe it was the Pew Research Center said that there were 90 million pieces of AI generated content on the web in 2024. And in 2023, there were, there was 732% less AI generated content. So it's been exponential, quite frankly, the number or just the quantity of AI content. And frankly, 68% of healthcare consumers report difficulty distinguishing between authoritative medical content and AI generated content. And, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say, that could be problematic. So patients and healthcare buyers are being overwhelmed. And so it's not content volume that really matters. And SEO is great with volume. GEO, generative, is better with trust. And so trust is becoming more and more important. Quality has never mattered more. And so SEO, it's great for volume, like I said, volume of keywords, etc. But can it differentiate, or I should say distinguish between a low and high quality ad? The answer is no. So one of my, I think the answer to the first part of your question is SEO, it's not dying on its own accord. It's dying because of the amount and type of information that the internet is becoming. And so when you're looking at, how people search, they don't search in the same way anymore. OpenAI announced, ChatGPT reached 200 million weekly active users in 2024. And I think Bloomberg showed that Google search queries declined just by like 3%. But this is the first decrease of search queries in Google's history. And so just to show how powerful the search feature is of ChatGPT, you can look at that one characteristic. And SEO, therefore, has gone down in its effective, as its effectiveness of a tool by 2.3% or more. If people aren't using Google to search and they're using AI, therefore generative optimization is more important now than it ever has been. And it's just been increasingly so. So I can give just one quick example. Look, almost 50% of adults under, let's say adults under 40, so we could say like 20 to 40, are using AI chatbots as their primary search tool for health information. So that's surprising too. Instead of typing, we could say orthopedic surgeon or plastic surgeon, New York or Boston, they're asking specifically, I have a chronic knee pain and I'm considering surgery. What are my options and who should I see? SEO would completely fail in that situation. GEO wouldn't, because GEO is really looking for the contextual truth, quality results. So if your website as a healthcare provider or your digital presence for that matter is SEO targeted and not GEO optimized, you're not going to show up in that ChatGPT voice query. You're just going to be lost. And so it's more important than ever to be not SEO optimized, but GEO optimized. And frankly, I would advise clients in 2026 to kind of forget SEO. You need a website, but your website needs to be GEO optimized first. SEO is nice to have, but it's not necessary to have.
All right, so let's move on, James. And I know that you have been working with a lot of health tech companies, and you also help a lot of providers providers, clinics, physicians that are interested in acquiring new patients to their practices. So let's talk about some of the key strategies and tactics that are working today and that will be critical to get right in 2026.
Yeah, I mean, look, let me just kick it off. Is the biggest problem that a lot of companies face, and they might not even know it yet, is that they're applying SEO playbooks to AI search. So they're focusing on keyword density, meta tags, backlink building, but AI models don't care about traditional SEO signals. They really care about whether they can confidently understand what you do and why patients should trust you. So that playbook that you mentioned, Rodrigo, is super important, but the old playbook that we might have spoken about last year or the year before, it just doesn't work for LLMs. And so there's a lot of mistakes that companies are making, and they're spending big bucks to do it too. So they're becoming inefficient enterprises because they're not spending on the right tech. So yeah, I mean, that's the headline right now is the old playbook doesn't work. What you need to be doing is using AI content tools to pump out posts. You need to also have, very importantly, a human in the loop for that, so that your AI generated content, you can do it at volume, but it needs to be quality content. It can't just be unchecked. There needs to be checks and balances, and a human is really the best suited for that. But if you're not using AI generated content, you're not going to be able to keep up and remain relevant and continue to obtain high engagement rates. So that's really key right now, is running prompt tests internally, and you need to continually check how are the different LLMs representing my brand, my company, what I do, who I am. And that needs to be a weekly part of the CMO and their team, part of their workflow. We can certainly get into specifics, but one big number is from a Forrester market research survey. I think it was CMOs and their team could spend up to 12 hours per week testing AI prompts, but prompt engineering accounts for less than 5% of AI visibility. So what you need to be focused on is not just reviewing AI models. You need to generate high trust content through press releases, through human in the loop, AI generated content, through podcasts, through humans talking online, on a YouTube video. That's really high credibility, and a lot of companies really aren't doing that. So, I think time's going to be, in the next quarter, it's going to be really interesting to see how big companies, modify their CMO and their teams, and if that focus shifts towards LLMs or not.
So James, let's get into some of the specifics. And let's imagine for a second that you're the new CMO of a health clinic in New York, and you have a multi-specialty health system, and you're tasked to position the brand across LLMs and acquire new patients. And you're responsible for your website and for content and for everything marketing. What are some of the things that you would do initially in your first 90 days to make sure that you have the right foundations in place?
Yeah, look, I think the first 90 days like I mentioned, like the first quarter or the second quarter of this year, that represents a quarter, a fiscal quarter for that matter. So it's vital, frankly, that irrespective of if you're in healthcare, but specifically if you are, you need to have original research. Okay, you can have AI generated content on your socials, etc., but on your website and on your other, public facing digital presence, you need to have things that are cited by subject matter experts, people who are credentialed, clinically reviewed or peer-reviewed clinical publications. It's been shown that content with author credentials and clinical review bylines gets cited up to 6 times more frequently than anonymous content, and that research that's original, that is in a peer-reviewed publication, can be cited up to 12 times more in AI responses. So my goal would be to, one, if I have a healthcare clinic, a multi-site clinic, I want to look at my professionals who I've hired, the medical professionals, understand where is their research in PubMed, for instance. What did they work on when they were a grad student or in med school or in the last 5 years as a professional? Aggregate that content and start generating thought leadership pieces that feature, the original work, feature the company name where I'm working now, and make it relevant to 2026. And AI, you'll be surprised, will pick that up and pick it up more frequently than your competitors who don't have that type of content. So that's where I would spend, I would say, 90% of my time during the first 90 days. The other 10% of my time, I would focus on, frankly, what we would say is experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness, EEAT, which is an acronym, Google Search Quality Rater Guidelines. So we want to have a website overall that has a positive trust signal, especially in healthcare. And aside from original research and credentialed expertise who's writing that research, you need to have, let's say, reviews of your practice from verified patients. And there's a whole, it gets really cloudy at times, but there's a right and wrong way to have healthcare reviews. Of course, it needs to be anonymized, de-identified, et cetera. But there are tools out there that I would spend time acquiring so that we could be rated as a top tier facility by the public and by people who have come through our platform. So those are the two main areas I would spend all of my time in the first 90 days, Rodrigo. And frankly, not enough people are spending time there because it's hard. You can't generate original research, if you don't actually have the credentialed staff and if you don't have publications already. So in large part, you need to hire the right people as well, who have a track record of consistent, credible publications. So I'll leave it there, but those are the main things I would spend my time on.
All right. So let me try to summarize for our listeners today. So one key strategy is to build strong authority signals, and some of the tactics that you mentioned, James, it's to feature clinicians and subject matter experts in your content, adding clinical reviews, and making sure that you're grounding the content as well in lived experiences, also real patient customer stories. If I could add that on top of your list, but I think that, and then finally, you also mentioned creating original research content using proprietary data and so on. So that would be a key one. Then you also talked about, James, earlier about the importance of creating a clean, structured website that it's readable and easy for LLMs to read, understand, and for example, you talked about the structure, you talked about schemas, and for example, FAQs. It's a good example of doing that. So, can you talk a little bit about like what are some of the things that you could do to, structure your website correctly so that LLMs can find you?
You're absolutely right, Rodrigo. So high-performing brands make their content easy for AI to understand. And there have been reports out there and in my world that show FAQ, so frequently asked question, FAQ schemas. If you have one, it can increase your AI citation probability by up to 300%. Okay, so you're much more likely to be cited in a search query that somebody might, initiate on, let's say, ChatGPT, if you have one of these on your website. Or I should say, actually, it needs to be, either on a web page, or you can have it as a file, LLMs.txt files on your web server. And basically a schema, when you're talking about structured data, a schema is a map of the structured data on your website. So you want to have a clear, concise, and strong, internal linking strategy on your website. No contradictions on your website, no fuzzy messaging. You have to avoid jargon. It needs to be factual. You need to think of it as prices, dates, names. Everything needs to be consistent, simple. The shorter, the better, because when AI is, posed with a question-based query, let's say it's, a 15 or 20 word question that somebody types in or speaks to ChatGPT, it's going to go out there and scour the web, but it doesn't have time to go read a 300-page schema, right? It needs to go and say, okay, this website has this, that, and the other. We're going to bring that information into the response. So working with a schema is super important. They're easy to do. I would even use AI. I would use my AI of choice. Could be ChatGPT, for instance. Generate an HTML-based schema or a JSON-based schema, and have your web developer or somebody on your tech team, or even if you have a CMO in-house, have them review it and publish it to your server, and consistently make sure it's it's updated as well as you add more and more content to your website. So it's super important to have, and third-party validation is also critical. And look, if you're going to be mentioned, you should be mentioned in a credible third-party domain. And if you are mentioned in a credible third-party domain, you can be up to 8 or 9 times more likely to appear in AI recommendations. So if you have a network of providers or service providers who support your platform, or let's say technology that your patients use post-visit or pre-visit, reach out to them and see if there's a way to co-publish content so that you are referenced on their website and vice versa. Because the research speaks for itself. If another domain in the internet ecosystem refers to your website, and that domain is high authority, AI has a much higher likelihood of trusting you as a high quality source for an answer. And I'll leave you with a couple examples. Press coverage is super important, and analyst reports. If you're a publicly traded company, having an analyst report on your website is super important. Podcasts and press releases. Press releases are incredibly important, and until right now, Rodrigo, that's been one of the secrets that we've kept close at hand for our clients is go put out a couple press releases around this topic and make sure that you link to these 3 websites. Because once you have that press release out there, it's like having a peer-reviewed publication. It's a tier 1 source, and it greatly increases the odds of you being in the results for an AI search.
Yeah, so let me just quickly summarize, some of the key takeaways that you just shared with us. The one was making sure that you have a basic schema, and you mentioned the map, that it's essentially the map of your website, and making sure that you have structured data throughout your site, nothing confusing, everything clear, maintaining strong internal linking between the different pages as well. You mentioned removing confusing messaging. I think that's also a key job of the marketer, to ensure that everything is consistent across the site. And also you talked about, keep the factual names of your products, your SKUs, your prices, your dates, everything that you're offering, consistent everywhere. So that's one. And then you also talked about building a credible third-party, credibility and authority, and you mentioned press coverage, analyst reports, and so on. What else would you do? Is there anything about, let's talk a little bit about the content. If you're producing content, like you talked about having a human in the loop when you're producing content and posting.
Yep.
But I have a question. I mean, I think that a lot of companies are playing a volume game as opposed to, the quality game, but maybe there is a middle point. But most importantly, like, you're not trying to boil the ocean, and you're not trying to create just as much content as possible just for the sake of having volumes of content. But would it make sense to do some research about what are the prompts or the actual questions that people are searching for when they are trying to find you? And so maybe it makes sense to prioritize, the types of content or search queries or prompts to focus on.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. And I think you're absolutely right. Look, again, high performing brands, they build product pages, or in healthcare, if you're not a product company, let's say you're a services company, you need to build a services page that is skimmable to the human eye, straightforward for the human, clean, and answer. Well, you should actually ask questions on your web page. And that goes back to the frequently asked questions. Every page should have a couple questions and answers. And in essence, your page must answer, what does this solve? Who is it for? Why would somebody choose this over an alternative? What's the competition? How much does it cost? And if you're able to answer just 2 or 3 of those per page and have it in a FAQ section on every page, AI will reward you by bringing you into the answers and results that it delivers to people who are searching. And going back to like making it clean for the human eye, you should also ensure that your website and the content on your pages is machine legible and consistent. So I actually mentioned this earlier, is you don't want to have contradictions. And if you do have inconsistent positioning of, material, like, the year I was born or the price for the service, you could see up to 70% lower visibility across AI than if you just maintain consistency across all pages. And again, this is a reward mechanism that AI and that Google had way back in the day when we were caring about SEO and how pages were written. If you had contradictory information, Google would downrank your site. It would penalize it. The same goes for LLMs. They're going to penalize incorrect, inconsistent information. And I would just leave you with, like, one of the hardest things to do, and I don't think you can pay somebody enough to do this correctly, speak in the customer language. If you're selling healthcare services and products, write it in a way that's digestible. We all know, somebody, at a healthcare facility could be highly credentialed, very smart, but using PhD level, language, frankly, or sentences or structure is going to get people confused. Confuse LLMs. You need to write in a 10th grade reading level, because you can get many multiples more people to comprehend your page, your product, your services, than if you write in a PhD level, just for example, context. And dumbing down really complex things is challenging, but if you do that and you're comfortable with it, AI will reward you greatly. So that's some advice. It sounds simple, but as we all know, telling somebody what you do in a sentence is much more difficult than if I say, tell me what you do in 5 minutes. One's way more hard than the other, and the same goes for content quality and how straightforward it is to comprehend your website.
I think that's a powerful reminder, Jeff. I think really simplifying the language, to make sure that it's really understandable. Speaking in the customer language, I think it's super important in health and life sciences for sure. And let me ask you, let me go back to the content. I mean, what would be, if how does the LLMs really differentiate, or really, if they can really understand the difference between a quality original piece of content versus something that it's been just generated by another AI tool? I think there is going to be a lot of noise, and even companies that do not have original research or data or content, they can also make up stuff and validations, and they can hire a PR agency. So that creates more noise in the marketplace. So I am just curious, like, creating original content, producing your own stuff, it takes time and effort. So I would imagine that a lot of companies are thinking, how can I cut corners here? Because how would LLMs really understand the difference between the original stuff and something that it's being just replicated or copied?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point that you bring up. And, look, we can all buy an AI content tool. We can all sound like Albert Einstein, right? We can sound like Shakespeare at the same time. And you can even blend the two just by typing that into ChatGPT. So how does that differ from, real research that's been done by people and teams over time and has been reviewed by, boards of experts, et cetera? AI, at least when you say conduct original research, it doesn't mean go out and ask ChatGPT to generate an original article. It means go into PubMed, or just using the healthcare example, or go into a medical device company's patent portfolio, for instance. Find the publications that were published and cited for use for the patent application. That's original research. It's already been created pre-AI or pre-ChatGPT. Let's just use that for example. ChatGPT knows when that content's been published. And if it's been in the last 2 weeks, there's probably a likelihood that it's phony. Let's say there's no publication date on the content. Again, that raises a red flag for AI. If it has a publication date and it's been in a peer-reviewed journal, it can say, with a lot of confidence, this was not fluff, or this is not fluff. We're going to rank this higher in terms of authority score than this other piece of content that we don't even, we can't find these researchers that are listed because maybe ChatGPT made them up. And, there are ways that you can create high authority content, and it's hard to fake that type of content because you need to have real people, dates, and real proof of publication in sources that you can't publish fluff in. And so that makes press releases with the right agency. It makes journal publications, podcasts, original video or news appearances, media appearances, all the more valuable because anybody can generate content, like you just said. But can you generate it through a channel that has verification steps in place? And the answer is not everybody can do that, even with AI. So, look, I'm not going to say AI can always pick up on a malactor who's trying to impersonate a famous researcher, but 9 times out of 10, it's going to pick that up and penalize you. So is it worth the risk? No, but people are taking it for sure. So there's a lot of fake information out there, without a doubt.
James, let me ask another question. And what's the role of customer reviews sites, for example, other forums, for example, Reddit, for example, or other similar places where people go and ask questions and you can review what other people have answered and so on. There are, Wikipedia, there is a lot of these other established digital, places,
Yep.
if you will, where what's the role of those channels in GEO? And if you are a brand or a company that does not have presence in those sites, what would you do?
That's a very good point. So not everybody can create a Wikipedia page. And what I mean by that is you have to have credible sources behind your name or whatever it is that you want to have on Wikipedia, for instance, in order to even have an article submitted for review and for it to last through that review cycle. There's a level of diligence that's conducted by humans across Reddit, Wikipedia, and other forums that is appealing for LLMs in the context of GEO, because the average Joe, albeit you can publish in these in Reddit, for instance, or for that matter in Wikipedia, there's a couple other layers of verification that have to take place in order for that content to go live. And there's an assumption in place, right, that an LLM assumes if there's several layers of review, of diligence, etc., that take place before the content is live, it's better content. And so, when you put a barrier to making content live, it's rewarded positively. And when I'm looking at Wikipedia and Reddit on the surface, they're the same. They go through a peer review process of sorts, albeit there's different, mechanisms in place. But, Reddit's certainly prolific because it's showing firsthand perspectives on products and services that you can't find elsewhere that have gone through an up-ranking process. Whereas Wikipedia, you're not going to find a review of a product or an anecdote that 1 million people have up-ranked for a healthcare procedure or a medical device. So AI is going to scour these forums that have that roadblock in place to go live because it's high fidelity when you compare it to the rest of the information online. So they're incredibly important, and hiring somebody to write a Wikipedia page for your business overnight, it doesn't happen. It's not easy. And even if you get it through, your Wikipedia page would only have been live for, let's say you did it last year, for a year. How does that compare to companies who are already on Wikipedia for many, many, many years and have many references? So you can't just create that authenticity overnight, no matter how much money you have. So that's another great barrier, is money doesn't just get you in the door, and AI rewards that.
If you are a emerging brand, you're a startup, and you don't have a lot of this established credibility already, but you know that for GEO, forums like Reddit or Quora, for example,
Oh, yeah.
are good places to be. So, to start generating conversations with your audience. Let's, assuming that your audience, it's really truly in those forums. What are some of the steps that you would take? I mean, if you were the CMO of a small emerging company,
Yeah.
I don't know, like what are some of the tactical things that you would do to start getting that motion going?
Look, I think influencer marketing has a place in my answer. It's not the entire answer, it's a small portion. I would identify somebody in the marketplace who has relevant experience, but more importantly, has authority and a following to engage our brand as a company who's new to the market, et cetera, to help show resilience, to help build visibility for us. I think the other important part of my answer, in addition to influencer tactics, and is frankly, go out there and build a brand that's consistent. Don't change your narrative every month. Stick with something and build consistent, high quality content around it, and push it through high trust channels. So in essence, try to start commenting on forums. It might not happen overnight. You might not be accepted into a forum to be a commenter, but go out there and start the process. There's no time like the present when it comes to forums, especially when you need to be accepted and your content needs to hold a degree of authority. Start doing that now. No amount of money is going to, give you the upper hand here. It's time and, frankly, sweat equity. And the CMO's role is now, frankly, less boardroom, leather chair. It's more elbow grease, rolling up your sleeves. It's harder now to be a CMO than I think it ever was. And, it's a really intriguing role to be in now. And I think more so than any other time, being a brand agency or being a, paid search or paid advertising agency, it was always an intriguing business model, but now it's become even more important to be, ahead of the curve and to have that reputation online that you can carry forward into the next, few years and build up your visibility and become the high trust authority in your market, because that's the new competitive moat, is AI visibility and showing up in the AI answers.
So James, this leads me to my final question before we wrap up, and that's like, I mean, how do you measure, how do you track, and how do you measure whether everything that you're doing, for GEO, if all of those efforts are actually working for you? How do you do the tracking? How do you make sure that you are moving in the right
Yeah.
direction? Do you have any tips for us?
Yeah, I would say, look, you need to look at benchmarks. You need to maybe establish your own internal benchmark. Look at prompts where you're mentioned, track those month over month. And there's a variety of tools in the marketplace that you can subscribe to that, similar to SEO tools. Now we're talking about AI visibility tools. Look at how your brand is represented through the different LLMs. That's the most important thing. And over a monthly cadence, create that benchmark where you can test yourself, your performance, and tweak your strategy based on real-time data that shows, how does AI view me? How does it view my brand? Who are my competitors? And you can take that, reverse engineer it, and become the number one answer and not the number five answer in the AI results. So similar to SEO, there's a variety of tools out there that can track AI visibility. I would subscribe to one of those and check it regularly and create that benchmark.
Yeah, absolutely. Like a couple that comes to mind. I mean, everybody knows SEMrush. SEMrush has been
Yeah,
around for years, and I know that they are now adding AI visibility features. So that's something that for people that are used to SEMrush, that I think that would be an option. And then another one that it's emerging and gaining quite a lot of popularity. It's one called Profound. So there are many others out there, but if you want to check out Profound or Scrunch AI, there's another one called Gauge, and there are many others. But just to for the audience today listening, those are some that you can go and check out.
fantastic.
All right, James, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate you joining the show and sharing your experience with GEO, and I wish you all the best. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And thank you to everyone else. Thank you for watching or listening until the next time. Thank you. Bye.